Earlier this month, the National Baseball Hall of Fame's Contemporary Era Player Ballot was finalized, with Jeff Kent earning election to the Hall of Fame. Rather than focusing on Kent, however, I want to focus on another player who appeared on that same ballot, Carlos Delgado. Delgado received 9 of a possible 16 votes, falling short of the 12 required for induction, and once again missed out on enshrinement. To be honest, I hadn't given Delgado's Hall of Fame candidacy much thought until a few days before the vote, when I watched Foolish Bailey's 2026 Hall of Fame breakdown. In that video, Bailey pointed out that if you look at all the players since integration with at least 8,000 plate appearances and sort them by OPS+, Carlos Delgado ranks 30th all-time, positioned among a group dominated by Hall of Famers, along with a handful of players later linked to steroid use. Hearing that immediately raised a question for me. Just how strong is Carlos Delgado's Hall of Fame case really? I'll acknowledge up front that I come into this slightly biased. Some of my earliest baseball memories came from the 2006 New York Mets, a team that was an offensive juggernaut. Carlos Beltran, David Wright, Jose Reyes, and right in the middle of it all, Carlos Delgado. That season, all 4 finished top 12 in NL MVP voting. Even late into his career, Delgado's bat remained elite. In that 2006 season, at age 34, when most hitters are well past their prime, he hit 38 home runs, drove in 114 runs, and posted a 909 OPS, good for a 131 OPS+. Delgado wasn't fast and was never a great defender, but Carlos Delgado did one thing, and he did it as well as almost anyone in baseball history. He hit. Delgado is one of just 21 first basemen in MLB history to reach 400 home runs, finishing his career with 473, the 16th most all-time at that position. Among first basemen with at least 400 home runs, his career OPS+ of 138 ranks 14th. However, when viewed through the lens of wins above replacement, or WAR, Delgado ranks just 40th among first basemen, weighed down by his minus 17.2 defensive WAR. This places him well below the average Baseball Reference WAR of 64.9 for the 25 first basemen currently in the Hall of Fame. In short, Delgado profiles as a top 15 to top 20 offensive first baseman of all time, but one who, on the surface, falls short of a clear Hall of Fame standard. However, despite appearing to be one of the greatest offensive first basemen in MLB history, I'd argue that Delgado's offensive value is dramatically understated because he played his entire career during the steroid era. Among players with at least 4,000 plate appearances between 1993 and 2009, the span of Delgado's career, Delgado ranks 17th in career OPS. 2 things stand out when examining this list. First, OPS numbers over such large sample sizes, in this case 4,000 plus plate appearances, are noticeably higher than what we are accustomed to seeing in 2025. Second, and related to this, a significant number of players near the top of the list have been credibly linked to steroid use. In fact, 5 players with higher OPS figures than Delgado have such associations. When we look at league average OPS over time, it illustrates the story even further. During Delgado's career, the average OPS was 755. When we compare that to the 16-year period before or after Delgado's career, the 1977 to 1992 league average OPS was 718, and the 2010 to 2025 OPS average was 726. Delgado, a player with no credible links to steroid usage, played his entire career during the steroid era, the period of the highest offensive production in MLB history. Relative stats like OPS+ are incredibly useful in allowing us to compare players across eras in terms of how much better they were for their league environment. There's no way, for example, we can compare Lou Gehrig to Aaron Judge, so rather than valuing them based on who was a better player or how they would fare in different eras, plus stats allow us to compare their relative greatness. OPS+ is not only league-adjusted statistic, but also adjusts for the ballpark. Because Todd Helton and Larry Walker played many of their home games at Coors Field, a park that dramatically inflates offense due to its high altitude, their OPS+ is adjusted downward to account for a hitter-friendly environment, ensuring their production is measured relative to league average rather than boosted by altitude. OPS Plus is designed to place players on an even playing field by adjusting raw OPS for league and park context. However, if a significant number of players are using steroids and inflating offensive output, the league itself becomes distorted. In that environment, OPS Plus loses some of its usefulness because it assumes comparable underlying conditions that no longer exist. For a player like Delgado, it becomes evident then that his already elite OPS Plus of 138 is drastically undervalued. Furthermore, since the formula for WAR uses context-adjusted stats, Delgado's offensive and overall WAR is also undervalued. Rather than simply noting that Delgado has been undervalued due to the offensive inflation of the steroid era, this analysis seeks to quantify what his true OPS Plus and baseball reference WAR might look like under a more neutral league context. There are two potential approaches to this problem, both of which come with significant limitations. The first would involve isolating players with credible ties to steroid use, recalculating league average OPS with those players removed, and then recalculating Delgado's OPS Plus. However, this method is deeply flawed. Any list of players linked to performance-enhancing drugs would almost certainly fail to capture the full extent of steroid use, as a relatively few number of players ever admitted to usage or were formally implicated in the Mitchell Report. Even if such a list were complete, we would still need to identify the specific seasons in which those players were using PEDs and remove only those performances. This would be even more speculative and impractical. For these reasons, I didn't try this approach. The second approach, and the one that I used in this analysis, was to adjust Delgado's stats for the league environment of the 16 years before and after his career. There are clear flaws with this approach too, the most obvious being that Delgado didn't play in those eras. However, when we look at the history of OPS in the modern era, since the mound was lowered in 1969, these pre- and post-steroid eras are more in line with the long-term average, with the steroid era being the main outlier period. In short, while the approach is by no means perfect, it provides us the way to consider how valuable Delgado was relative to a more typical offensive environment. For the sake of clarity, the two reference periods used to adjust Delgado's statistics will be referred to as the pre-steroid era and the post-steroid era. To calculate Delgado's OPS Plus under each of these league environments, the first step is determining his career ballpark adjustment. Using the OPS Plus formula shown above, we can calculate this value directly to find that Delgado's career park factor corresponds to a multiplier of 0.964. With this adjustment in hand, it can then be applied to the OPS Plus equations for the pre- and post-steroid eras. Adjusting Delgado's stats for the pre-steroid era, Delgado's OPS Plus rises over 20 points to 159.7. While the jump is smaller in the post-steroid era given the stronger offensive environment, Delgado's OPS Plus still rises approximately 17 points to 154.7. Under either adjustment, Delgado's offensive standing shifts significantly. Rather than profiling as merely a top 15 to 20 offensive first baseman in baseball history, he emerges as one of the very best offensive first basemen of all time. Among first basemen with at least 400 home runs, Delgado projects into roughly the 4 to 7 range offensively, producing home run totals and OPS Plus figures nearly identical to those of Stan Musial under the pre-steroid era adjustment. In both scenarios, Delgado is firmly surrounded by Hall of Famers. The only clear exceptions are likely first ballot inductees Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera, along with Mark McGwire, whose absence from the Hall is tied to his steroid use rather than his on-field performance. But what would this improvement in OPS Plus mean for his change in baseball reference WAR? While a change in OPS Plus alone is not sufficient to directly recalculate baseball reference WAR, it can still be used to produce a reasonable estimate. At his career OPS Plus of 138, Delgado accumulated an RBAT, batting runs above average, total of 372. RBAT is a baseball reference statistic that measures how many runs a player created with the bat compared to an average hitter, given the same number of plate appearances, while adjusting for park and league run environment. Because RBAT and OPS Plus both capture offensive value, changes in OPS Plus can be used to approximate corresponding changes in RBAT. Doing this estimation, Delgado's RBAT increases to 430.5 under the pre-steroid adjusted OPS Plus, a gain of 58.5 runs. Under the post-steroid adjustment, his RBAT rises by approximately 45 runs to 417. Using a commonly accepted rule of thumb that 10 RBAT is roughly equivalent to 1 win above replacement, these increases translate to an additional 4.5 to 5.9 B-WAR. This would place Delgado's career baseball reference WAR at approximately 50. While this figure still falls short of the average baseball reference WAR for Hall of Fame first baseman, a career total near 50 B-WAR combined with an OPS Plus in the 155 to 160 range and more than 400 home runs presents a far more compelling Hall of Fame case than his unadjusted resume suggests. None of this is meant to argue that Carlos Delgado is an obvious or indisputable Hall of Famer. Even under more neutral offensive assumptions, his overall value still falls short of the typical Hall of Fame standard at first base. Defensive limitations matter, and WAR is designed to account for them. But that's not really the point. The point is that Carlos Delgado's offensive resume, already impressive on the surface, looks meaningfully stronger once we account for the distorted environment in which he played. When his production is evaluated among a more typical offensive context, he profiles not as a great hitter, but as one of the elite offensive first basemen in baseball history. Delgado's career sits in an uncomfortable space in baseball history. He played during the steroid era, benefited far less than many of his contemporaries, and yet is evaluated against league norms shaped by widespread offensive inflation. In that environment, context-adjusted metrics like OPS Plus and WAR understate just how exceptional certain players truly were. Whether or not Carlos Delgado ultimately belongs in the Hall of Fame is a judgment call. But the idea that his candidacy is weak, or that his offensive production was merely very good rather than historically great, doesn't hold up under closer scrutiny. If nothing else, Carlos Delgado forces us to ask a broader question. How many clean elite hitters from the steroid era are being quietly penalized for the era they happen to play in? And if the Hall of Fame is meant to tell the story of baseball history, that's a question worth taking seriously. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe. It would really help the channel continue to grow. Thank you, and see you again next video.